Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. In last week's blog, I've talked about why truth can be a thin concept when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to share with you what your body language and your tone of voice communicates to the intensive care team, and why you need to change it urgently so that you can have peace of mind, control, power, and influence. Before I get into today's topic, I want to share a quote that I wrote on today's topic, and the quote says, "Most of human interaction and communication is body language and tone of voice, and not the actual words spoken. 55% of communication is body language, 38% is the tone of voice, and 7% is the actual words spoken." Those numbers speak loudly, and when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, your body language and your tone of voice leave a massive impact on the intensive care team and on your critically ill loved one. If you and your family are like 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care who don't have peace of mind, who don't have control, don't have power, don't have influence, your body language and your tone of voice will communicate that to the intensive care team and to your critically ill loved one. If you are aware of your body language and your tone of voice, and you have mastered this area of your life, the intensive care team and your critically ill loved one will consciously or unconsciously pick up on it, and they will treat you differently because you give off a strong and confident vibe. You and your family are in a much better position to negotiate for what you want and what you expect. In life, you don't get what you deserve, but you get what you negotiate. Start with your body language and your tone of voice, and you will feel better, feel stronger, and you don't need to be intimidated by the world around you. So, if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care and is facing one of those challenging and difficult situations where they are either very unstable and in a very critical condition, or they are in a life-threatening situation, or they are in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, including long-term ventilation, or your loved one may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury, or your loved one may be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order, or your loved one may be in a situation where the intensive care team suggests a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment as being quote-unquote in the best interest of your critically ill loved one, or your loved one may even be approaching the end of life in intensive care. In those situations that I just mentioned, I find that it's almost like clockwork that whenever I interact with families of critically ill patients in intensive care, whether it be on the phone, on Skype, or in an intensive care environment, their body language and their tone of voice simply suck. Their body language and their tone of voice usually tells me everything that I need to know, and it's also telling me everything I need to know to set them off in the direction that they need to go to in order to get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly. Usually, 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care have no awareness that their poor body language and their weak tone of voice is telling the intensive care team that they can basically walk all over them, because their poor body language and their weak tone of voice is screaming so loudly that they don't know what to do, that they feel overwhelmed, they feel stressed, anxious, vulnerable, scared, tired, and they simply don't know what to do. The intensive care team, on the other hand, knows what to do, and they do so without really contemplating your feelings, your situation, and they also often don't contemplate what you and your family want. Intensive care is a complex environment, and if you and your family don't get a handle on things quickly, you might find that the intensive care team is making all the decisions for you without you and your family actually knowing whether they are doing the right things or not. Just remember for a second that if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care and is facing one of those challenging and difficult situations where they are either very unstable and in a very critical condition, or they may be in a life-threatening situation, or they are in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, or they may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury, or they may be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order, or they may be in a situation where the intensive care team suggests a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment as being quote-unquote in the best interest of your critically ill loved one, or your loved one may even be approaching the end of life in intensive care, and you still haven't paid any attention in those situations in how you show up in this challenging and also once-in-a-lifetime situation that you can't afford to get wrong, and you still haven't mastered your body language, your physiology, and your tone of voice. It'll be easy for the intensive care team to drive their mainly hidden agenda without you and your family even knowing what's going on. Imagine your critically ill loved one is in a situation where the intensive care team is telling you that your loved one may not survive the next few days, and the intensive care team is asking you to attend a formal family meeting to quote-unquote discuss with you the options and the agenda for the next few hours or for the next few days. You and your family show up for the formal family meeting, and you are still unaware that your body language sucks and that your tone of voice is weak, whiny, and you are still scared to speak up for what you want. The intensive care team in a formal family meeting knows what to say, they know how to say it, and they know your reaction if you are like 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care who have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence. The intensive care team knows how to get what they want if you are unprepared, and the intensive care team knows that you are unprepared just by looking at your poor body language and by listening to your weak tone of voice. It's easy for the intensive care team to drive home their mainly hidden agenda by selling to you and your family on what is quote-unquote in the best interest for your critically ill loved one, even if it may be a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment. Think about this for a moment. If you and your family walked into a formal family meeting with the intensive care team, and instead of your back being hunched, your shoulders moved forward and inward, your head down, you're avoiding strong eye contact, and you're having a weak handshake. You go in there and you stand up straight. Your shoulders are moved backwards, you have a strong body posture, you have a strong handshake, you maintain strong eye contact, and you speak clearly and strongly. The intensive care team knows immediately that they are dealing with a powerful family who is prepared to take a stand, and the intensive care team knows that they are dealing with a powerful force. Most of the time, no matter what the intensive care team says, it's almost always a result of what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. No matter how they position your critically ill loved one's prognosis, diagnosis, or treatment, it's almost always a result of what's being discussed way before they meet with you and your family. Intensive care teams can be very quick at painting doom and gloom and negative pictures. They can be very quick at pointing out that it's quote unquote in the best interest of your critically ill loved one to withdraw treatment or limit treatment, or to issue an NFR, not for resuscitation, or a DNR, do not resuscitate order. They don't tell you that they need the ICU bed for the next admission, and they don't tell you that they don't want to spend the money, don't want to use the staff, equipment and other resources, including emotional resources, in order to get your critically ill loved one out of ICU alive. The intensive care team often has motives to drive their agenda, and their agenda only, and they're very shrewd and very adept in selling you their hidden agenda that you are completely unaware of. It's even easier for them to do so if you and your family show up weak, and you show up with poor body language, and when you speak with a weak tone of voice. Your job therefore is to master this area of your life, and your job is to become aware that your body language and your tone of voice must be signs of strength and not signs of weaknesses. And you might say, Patrick, this is easier said than done. You don't know my situation, and you don't know that I can't just switch to a powerful body language, and I just can't change my tone of voice at the drop of a hat. And you are right, I don't know your exact situation, but I do know that 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care have no peace of mind, no control, no power and no influence. And I and the intensive care team can see it, and we can hear it in their poor body language and in their weak tone of voice. Remember what I said in the quote in the beginning. In life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Your negotiation power increases tenfold if you pay attention to your body language and to your tone of voice. You may have to fake it until you make it, and paying attention to your body language and your tone of voice are the first steps. You may not have a lot of time, because time in intensive care can be your enemy. If you don't have strong body language and a strong tone of voice, you've given up already. So, have strong body language and a strong tone of voice, and I promise you, the world around you will notice. So, how can you get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insights so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our Your Questions Answered section, where I answer your questions, or send me an email to support@intensivcarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call us. Find the phone numbers on our Contacts tab. Also check out our product section, where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting with me by clicking on the Products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.